What happened in the Garden of Eden? Part 2. Why did God plant the tree of knowledge of the difference between good and evil, the actual full name of the tree, in the Garden of Eden? Why not just leave that tree out? Note the name of that tree. It offers not just any knowledge, but experiential knowledge, both of good and evil, by comparison. One must eat from the tree, taste and physically experience it to gain that kind of knowledge. So we first ask, did God want Adam and Eve to know what good was, to recognize it, and experience it? Of course. But secondly, did he want them to experience doing evil? Definitely not. So, on the one hand, if God had not put that tree in the garden with a negative law attached to it, don't, they could never have fully comprehended and recognized what evil was compared to good. The other laws were do's, so there had to be at least one law that was a don't. They had to be able to experience the natural consequences of their choices, both good and bad. However, since that tree held the key to knowing what evil was, not just good, that side of life was something God did not want Adam and Eve to go through because it is painful and leads to very bad consequences. Nevertheless, God could not give them or us a choice between good and evil without allowing both good and evil to be presented together as alternatives. If there is nothing to choose between, there is no choice. Then why did God forbid eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Or to rephrase it more specifically, why did God make knowledge, particularly of evil, off limits? Because while that tree made it possible to recognize what it is to experience good and gain that knowledge, it simultaneously offered the recognition and knowledge of what it is to experience evil and the death and suffering that comes with it, something God naturally wanted to protect them and us from. But then we must ask, did God want to withhold the knowledge and experience of good from them and us? No. He wanted us to experience good, but with a real understanding of what it and its opposite actually are. So God created that tree for them as a door that disclosed the conflict between both. Furthermore, God had to teach them actions can result in both good and bad consequences. So he had to reveal the existence of law, that is, describe what is on both sides of the equals sign. Giving them that knowledge made them responsible for their choices and actions. Then, in order to impress upon Adam and Eve how powerful the consequences of choices and actions, particularly bad ones, can be, God had to give them a specific commandment that would reveal experientially both the dire negative results if disobeyed and the supremely positive results if obeyed. But he had to use some object that, without a law attached to it, was harmless, such as a tree, so that all the consequences resulted from law, not from the object itself. Remember, God creates everything good, not harmful. More importantly, they needed to understand for themselves how their choices and actions affected relationships with others. Thus, putting a negative commandment on the door, that tree, added a handle to it. Then revealing that commandment to Adam and Eve unlocked the door, making them answerable for what they chose. As the Apostle Paul explained, death comes by the law, not a tree. And only actions have consequences, so laws not only reveal, describe, and explain what consequences are waiting on the other side of the equation and why, but awareness of those laws makes us accountable. It unlocks our ability to obey by choice. If God had not attached a law to that tree and simply put that tree in the garden, nothing negative would have happened. Since a person cannot act upon or be accountable to a law that was not given or that does not exist. That tree was simply what God chose to use as a door to teach them how choices work, that actions, both good and bad, have natural, inevitable consequences. President and Apostle Donald H. Oakes explained, quote, "The act that produced the fall, eating from the tree, was not inherently wrong, but wrong because it was formally prohibited, because God attached a law to that tree." Unquote. The Apostle Orson Pratt detailed, quote, "So with regard to eating certain fruits of the garden, there is no evil in it of itself, that tree or its fruit. It was the commandment of the great God that made it an evil. Don't we perceive that the commandment made this, eating from that tree, an evil? Had it not been for this commandment, Adam would have walked forth and freely partaken of every tree, including that tree, without any remorse of conscience." You ask, but why did the Lord not withhold the commandment if the partaking of the fruit, only after the commandment was given, was sin? Why should there have been a commandment upon the subject at all, inasmuch as there was no evil in the nature of the thing, that tree, or eating its fruit, to be perceived or understood? I answer, the Lord had an object in view in regard to that man and the creation he inhabited. The Lord wanted this intelligent being called man to prove himself. Inasmuch as he was an agent, he desired that he should show himself approved before his Creator. Their relationship needed to be successfully tested so it could grow. Now I ask you, how can this be done without a commandment? Can you devise any possible means? No. Without law, without commandment or rule, there would be no possible way of showing his integrity, unless he had been placed in a position to be tried, and thus proven whether he would keep them, the commandments, or not. Then it was wisdom to try the man and the woman, so the Lord gave them this commandment. If he had not intended the man should be tried by this commandment, he never would have planted that tree in the midst of the garden. But the very fact that he planted it where the man could have easy access to it shows that he intended the man should be tried by it, and thus prove whether he would keep his commandments or not. Therefore, God was not secretly hoping for Adam to disobey him, though he knew it would happen. The penalty of disobedience to this law was death. You ask, but could he not give a commandment without fixing a penalty? I answer, he could not. It would be worse than folly for God to give a law to an intelligent being without affixing a penalty to it if it were broken. Why? Because all intelligent beings would discard the very idea of a law being given, which might be broken at pleasure, without the individuals breaking it being punished for their transgression. If nothing happened, they would say, since God does not regard his own laws, then why should we? For he suffers them to be broken with impunity and trampled underfoot by those whom he has made. Therefore we care not for him or his laws, nor his pretended justice. He doesn't keep his word. So where would have been the use of it if there had been no penalty affixed? Then you ask, but what was the nature, the purpose of this penalty? I answer, it was wisely ordained to be of such a nature as to instruct man, unquote, regarding what good and evil actually are and what God expects in his relationship with us. So God used that tree to reveal cause and effect, to show us laws are simply a way of knowing the outcome of our actions in advance. We need to know choices have consequences, and what the natural consequences of those choices are, that choices result in change, and growth is impossible without change. But change can be difficult. Elder Pratt next explained why God did not make mankind mortal to begin with. Quote, there is one very important item to be thoroughly understood by every person, and that is that when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, before this transgression took place, God did not make a mortal being. Why? It would be contrary to his great goodness to make a man mortal, subject to pain, subject to sickness, subject to death when they were yet innocent. If he had made them mortal and subject to pain, there would have been some cause to say that the Lord subjected man without a cause, any action on their part, to afflictions, sorrows, death, and mortality. But he could not do this, because it would be unjust. It was contrary to the nature of that infinite goodness which dwells in the bosom of both the Father and the Son to make such a being subject to any kind of pain. Unquote. We therefore conclude, on the one hand, God intended for us to gain the knowledge to understand the difference between good and evil, and to be free to experience the good by choice. But he could not, being perfectly just, 1, command us to eat from that tree, require us to go through the door into a world where evil also exists and opposes good, since God does not want us to suffer and experience evil, though at the same time he does want us to enjoy the good also found there and the greatest gifts that can come only after a mortal life. 2, not warn us about the consequences of entering such an adversarial world, and not tell us about the law he attached to that tree, because that also would be unjust and imperfect, since actions always have consequences whether we are aware of them or not. And 3, not put that tree, the door, in the Garden of Eden at all, not give us the choice, because then we could never become accountable, free, moral agents, one of his main goals in creating us, and we would not be able to experience compassion, remorse, or love, for we could not have understood any of them. We would lack that knowledge. Therefore, because God is the good teacher, and because he wanted us to have the ability to love, he had to, 1, put that tree in the Garden of Eden, provide a door that allowed us to enter a world where we choose to gain the experiential knowledge of good despite the presence of evil, so we could learn how to overcome evil with that good. 2, reveal the principle that actions have natural consequences. Tell us not to eat from that tree and fair warn us of the negative consequences if we did, by attaching a law and revealing that law to us so we would be responsible for what we chose. 3, implement the plan of mercy whereby God Himself would pay the price for all our mistakes, to offer us mercy, an opportunity to repent and choose rightly, and also to make possible an end of the suffering that resulted from our own poor choices. And 4, manifest by personal example the greatest attribute of a free moral agent: charity, agape, love in action, the kind of love God embodies, even the pure love of Christ. So, God's only option, in order to make possible His goals for our eventual, fully expanded, eternal happiness, was to create a door, put that tree in the garden, and attach a negative law that would open that door to the other side, add a door handle, then reveal that law to Adam and Eve, which unlocked that door and fastened a warning sign to it. So their own choices would determine whether they walked through and experienced good in opposition to evil or not. Their choices would determine whether they access the increased experiential knowledge and wisdom about the conflict between good and evil. God, in essence, said, I want you to experience good, but I don't want you to experience evil. For if you do, you shall also suffer the demands of justice and experience death. I don't want you to hurt. However, the choice is yours, and the ability to choose is one of my gifts to you. The door is there, and it is unlocked, so you can choose for yourself. But God also knew that with that expanded experiential knowledge, we could learn how to overcome evil with good. And we could become capable of experiencing His love, the good, in a way we never could without that ability to choose and the experience of actually choosing for ourselves in such a diverse environment filled with opposition in all things. Lastly, since God already knew before He created anything that all those He created would inevitably make mistakes, they were at best very good, not perfect, He had to ensure there would be an end to the making of those mistakes, an exit door on the other side of this life's adversarial experience. Therefore, death was introduced not only as a consequence, but also as a mercy. Strange as that may at first sound, so there could be an end to the negative consequences, such as suffering, and yet we would nevertheless retain the ability to choose individually whether we wanted those negative consequences to end permanently or not. We would then have the option to return to God's presence in heaven or not by choice, and to choose how close we would be to Him with experiential knowledge and a real, abiding understanding of what evil actually is and how to defeat it, as well as the strength to consistently choose the right, so we would never repeat our mistakes ever again for all eternity. so that heaven would remain heaven this time. No more wars in heaven. It would be a new kind of heaven. But we needed more than just an end to the negative effects of this life. We needed time to think deeply about what we truly desired. Therefore, because God truly loves us, He did not allow Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of life right away. They were not ready for what it offered, and neither are we. If they had eaten then, it would have permanently ended their ability to change and grow, and they would have lived forever as fallen beings in endless sorrow. Death and pain would have ruled eternally, not temporarily, and it would have become impossible for anyone to pass into a resurrected state of perfection and endless joy, which was the exact opposite of what God planned for everyone. Instead, the negative consequences, such as suffering and destroyed relationships, would have become permanent immediately, and they and all of us would have been denied everything good forever. So God was protecting us when He temporarily made the tree of eternal life off limits. Thus, because God's plan is perfect, because all things have been done in the wisdom of Him who knoweth all things, God remains both perfectly just and perfectly merciful. He gave us the ability to choose and the time to do it, so we may become what He intended, all due to His grace, not of ourselves. We have been given the ability and opportunity to choose either justice, what comes as a natural consequence by law, what we actually earned, or mercy, what comes as a free gift by grace, what we did not earn. He gave us the freedom to receive according to our desires, either for good or for evil, and free to act for ourselves instead of simply being acted upon. What a gift! We can use a coin as an analogy here. A coin has two sides, not one, and we must accept both sides of that coin to have complete use of that coin. But why do we need the ability to choose? And why did God give us the ability and opportunity to recognize and experience the conflict between good and evil? Because love is a choice. And to become perfect, we need the ability to love. Without the ability to choose, relationships, particularly eternal relationships, are impossible, since they depend on the ability to love. So choice makes it possible to love one another and God, everyone. Nevertheless, without choice, we would not be able to hate either. Therefore, choice determines character, and character determines destiny. Then the degree and type of love we have determines the extent and permanence of our relationships. It is this ability to choose that allows us to develop the character of Christ. So, having that ability to choose was the only way we could grow and be transformed without permanent offense to justice or mercy because of the covenant relationship offered through the atonement of Jesus Christ into resurrected beings who could never die, either physically or spiritually, a gift far greater than mere immortality, and enjoy the higher level of relationships and fullness of joy God always intended for us. After all, God is our Heavenly Father. He loves us. With all that love from God, why would Eve choose to disobey God and eat from the tree? Click on the right video to continue.